exhibit, the museum exhibit on the assassination, and then Ford Theater and the Peterson House.
Well, I think we might have to take a field trip then.
You should.
Speaking of museums, have you been to the Lincoln Museum in Springfield?
I have. I was there the opening weekend in April a few years ago.
Your reaction?
My reaction is that I don't object to the wax figures. I wish they looked more like the people.
Okay.
And also this. There is, those of you who have been there know that there's a wax tableau of the entire Lincoln family standing in that rotunda before tragedy struck and any of the boys died or the president was shot. And then there's a simulated wall of the White House as you walk further into the museum, and you'll find the wax figures of General Grant, of Frederick Douglass, and within spitting distance of them is a wax life-size figure of John Wilkes Booth staring at the Lincoln family. And at first I thought nothing of it. I thought, oh yes, that's Booth. But one of my concerns is that Booth has somehow gotten away with it in historical memory. And by that I mean, we don't think of Booth the way we might think of Lee Harvey Oswald or James Earl Ray. We think of them as terrible people and cipher men, nothing good about them. So I'm convinced that we think of Booth as sort of an antiquarian hero, anti-hero, who did a terrible thing. But he's also fascinating and romantic to us. And I don't think that's good. And so I objected to the fact that there's a life-size figure of John Wilkes Booth standing near Abraham Lincoln. If you would go to the John Kennedy Library in Boston, would you expect or want to see a life-size wax figure of James Earl Ray standing near President Kennedy? If you went to the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta, or the Lorraine Motel Museum, where King was shot, which is now going to become a museum, would you want to go there and find a life-size wax figure of James Earl Ray? And then I went to the gift shop in Springfield. And for sale to America's children was a toy, plastic, replica Derringer pistol, just like the one Booth used to murder Lincoln. And again, to belabor the point, would you go to the John Kennedy Library and wish to see for sale or purchase for your child or grandchild a toy replica of Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle that he used to shoot President Kennedy in the head? I think the answer is no. And for the same reason, I don't think we should be selling toy Derringer pistols at the Lincoln Museum. I believe after I mentioned that on the Today Show, it vanished immediately from the museum gift shop. I don't know how I feel about this. There's also a whole wax diorama type display of Lincoln in the box at Ford Theater with Booth shooting him. And again, you know, would we make up wax figures of Lee Oswald kneeling in the window of the book depository shooting Kennedy? Would we make a wax figure of James Earl Ray and show him in the act of shooting Martin Luther King? I don't think we would. And I don't think children should see wax figures of Abraham Lincoln being shot in the head. Maybe I'm being too sensitive on that point, but I just don't approve of that.
Susan?
I really want to ask the question because...
Can you hear the question, or shall I repeat it?
I think you need to repeat it because there's a little bit of echo and I can't quite hear all the words.
Okay, just repeat it. My question is about his relationship with his grandmother or his grandmother, who gave him the woodcut of the Derringer pistol, which you were fascinated enough about that you spent a whole lifetime and eventually wrote a book about. So, certainly not to glorify, but there is a kind of a morbid attraction to these.
I did hear enough of that question. It's about the print my grandmother gave me.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, what really fascinated me about that print is not so much that it was the Derringer. Well, first, it was the Derringer one-dimensionally in print. It wasn't the toy Derringer to put in my hand. But secondly, What really fascinated me about that print was reading that story over and over again, because it was a clipping from the Chicago Tribune from the morning of April 15, 1865, the morning the president had died. And it reproduced the headline, "The President Shot, Booth the Act of the Assassin," and then it got into the story. And then in the middle of the sentence, after Booth leaps from the president's box, lands on the stage, cries out to the audience, vanishes into the wings, and the story had been cut off in mid-sentence. And I must have read that story 100 times when I was a boy. And so I said to myself, I have to know the rest of the story. So it really wasn't so much the Derringer that became the obsession. What became the obsession was me reading this unfinished story that I wanted to know the rest of. So that's more of a detailed explanation of that print and why it was so important to me.
The question was not the print. The question was the gift. It was not a stamp collection. It was not a chemistry set. It was a Derringer that this grandmother gave as a picture of something that certainly was of interest, but it was the Derringer.
I think you'll have to repeat that because I couldn't hear all the words.
She was saying that it was the fact that it was the Derringer that your grandmother chose to give as a gift.
Oh, right. Well, that was certainly, I'm sure, part of her taste for action and morbid stories from history. I'm sure that's what caught her eye when she bought it at the store. I think she bought it at Marshall Field's department store.
Which is the same as going into a gift shop and buying
Her comment is that it's similar, it's the same as going into a gift shop and buying, you know, what you found at the Springfield Museum, perhaps.
Oh, that I disagree with, because the print wasn't something for me to play with or aim at my playmates and pretend I was shooting them. So I would distinguish between a toy gun and a historical print with part of the newspaper story and that sort of thing.
Well, while we're talking about children's reactions to things, a lot of people may not realize that you wrote a junior fiction book, or not fiction, you wrote a version of the book for young readers.
Yes, it was published this February for the bicentennial. And Scholastic, the publisher of Harry Potter, is also very interested in publishing historical, true stories for children. And so that book is called Chasing Lincoln's Killer. And it's for 9-year-olds to 13-year-olds. Although really, a 7 or 8-year-old interested in reading could read the book. I know some who have. And essentially, it's the Manhunt book rewritten for a young audience with probably 40 additional photographs or pieces of artwork. And this is the first time I've written for children, and I thought it would be easy. I thought I could just cut parts out of Manhunt and stitch them together, and there it is. But it proved to be much more difficult, and I really had to rethink and rewrite parts of the book to make it a seamless story for young people. It was very difficult because I had to cut so much out. Manhunt is about 140,000 words, and the children's book wasn't really supposed to be more than 30 or 35,000 words. So I had to keep in the core of the story and keep it exciting and true. But there was, inevitably, there's material I just had to leave out of the book. But I'm very